think we're ready. Are we ready? Excellent. Right. Well, a wonderful good morning, everybody. Aren't we a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed bunch? Welcome to the press conference hosted by WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature. 2 years later than initially planned and in a different country, but finally we managed to bring the global deal for nature over the finishing line. So we're here together to assess what's hot and what's not in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is Bernadette Fischler-Hooper. I'm the head of international advocacy with WWF UK, and I'm joined by some amazing and very awake WWF colleagues. So here's what we'll do today. Firstly, we will hear from our Director General, Marco Lombardini, with an overview of the outcomes. After that, Li Lin, our Senior Director of Global Policy and Advocacy with WWF International, will tell us what we got in terms of species and habitat conservation. And then we will hear from Guido Broekhoven, the Head of Policy Research and Development with WWF International, on the results on footprint drivers and the rights-based approach. And then lastly, I will tell you a little bit about the implementation mechanism and what to expect there. We will each present our key points, and then we will of course, have some time for questions. Thanks all for joining. As always, we will also be available afterwards if we run out of time behind the green room for further questions or to dive any deeper in any of the topics. Right. Without any further ado, let's get started. Marco, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for your resilience in being here in the room this morning, but also to everyone online. Yes, today we need to celebrate an historic Kunming-Montreal agreement, the new deal for nature and people have been waiting for a long time. An historic agreement for a number of reasons, and for the fact that it is signaling and sending very important messages to all of us. First of all, is the message that we need to stop taking nature for granted. Stop a delusional idea that we can continue to use nature's services and resources unsustainably without consequences. We today know, and early in the morning, late in the night, we agreed that it's time to decouple our economic development from environmental destruction. And we need to do that for a number of reasons, because it's our duty to coexist with the rest of life on the planet, but increasingly clear also that if we don't do that, we are going to be the ones paying the highest price. Future development opportunities are related and dependent on healthy natural systems. But even the gains that we made over the last several decades in terms of human development can be jeopardized if we continue to lose nature and biodiversity at the current rate. You all know the figures are terrifying, and the other monumental achievement of this agreement is that we have now agreed on an overall mission to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. This is something that will require all hands on deck, everybody in society to play their part, but it's also a mission that will bring all the players around a common plan of action. Halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 is the equivalent of the 1.5 for climate, and has the ability and the power to inspire and to unite the whole of society around the world. Almost 20 countries are signatories to the Convention on Biological Diversity and will be tasked with implementing the agreement. Let me also pause for a second and recognize the epic work of the presidency, the host country, and all parties in really reaching an agreement around such a complex and ambitious task of reversing nature loss. It has been an emotional moment as well, because we've been seeing commitments not fulfilled for very long, and yesterday this morning, we have been feeling the unity of the world in terms of the commitment to halt and reverse nature loss, biodiversity loss by 2030. At the same time, I also want to acknowledge the concerns that the Democratic Republic of Congo expressed yesterday, just before the adoption. There are legitimate concerns, strong concerns about the need to increase the mobilization of resources for developing countries to deliver this ambitious agreement. And that leads me to list briefly what are the key elements, the key commitments that the world has embraced as part of the agreement. First of all, as I said, the overarching mission. This is going to be the North Star, the Southern Cross, the guiding light for all of us to measure our contributions. Is the 1.5 equivalent for nature, halt and reverse nature loss by 2030, and it is the necessary mission in order to build a nature-positive future. And then there are the various 30s. 30% of protection on land, inland waters, and ocean. This means doubling the current level of protection of nature on land and tripling it in the ocean. Very ambitious, very necessary, and a very important pillar. Then there is a 30% of restoration of degraded land and ocean, and this is a target that needs to be specified better. We need to define better the baseline, but the ambition is right, the focus is right. It is about bringing back the nature that we have lost. And we know that nature can bounce back if given a chance. Then there are the other 30, and that's about the $30 billion of international financial flows by 2030 that the convention is committed to deliver. And that is within an overall figure, or $200 billion of investment, direct investment in biodiversity conservation. This is a doubling of the 2020 baseline of funding for biodiversity. And then we have the other pillar, which is extremely important, and my colleagues will talk more about in a minute, which is about the other 70%. If we focus on protecting 30% of the planet, we need to sustainably manage the rest, the 70% left. And this is something that the convention, the agreement of the convention is now focusing on quite strongly. There are 4 sectors identified as main sectors to focus on: agriculture, fishing, aquaculture, and forestry. We're talking about reduction of footprint. We are talking about agroecology. This is the first time that the UN Convention mentioned agroecology as a sustainable way to generate food, healthy food, in balance with the environment. But we don't see in the text measurability and the targets needed to actually properly deliver and tackle the footprint issue. So we urge parties to develop those targets as part of the national plans and in the lead up to COP16, the next biodiversity COP. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can celebrate truly an ambitious and transformative agreement to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. Early this morning, countries have chosen the right side of history. Countries have listened to the voice of the voiceless, the amazing biodiversity that we share the planet with, the voice of the most vulnerable and marginalized populations of the world that are the receiving end of climate change and biodiversity loss and environmental and nature degradation, and to the indigenous people that have been demanding for very long the recognition of their rights, the recognition of their territories, the recognition of their cultures as they depend directly on nature. After this agreement, I don't know you, but I feel much more comfortable and proud to look in I am a to look in the eyes of my grandaunt, and to know that through this agreement we can build a better future for all our children and grandchildren. Now, however, is everyone's duty, the whole of society, to truly make history by implementing the agreement. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Got a bit emotional on myself. So like Marco said, this whole package has the mission to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity by 2030. And that's exactly the right level of ambition. Nothing less will suffice to tackle the twin crises of climate change and nature loss. We cannot afford any more loss of nature going forward. Now the big question is, do the goals and targets actually add up to that mission? Or is the mission just a pretty wrapping paper that is around a rather disappointing package? Let's hear about that first from Lynn, please.
Thank you, Bernadette. If we want to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity by 2030, the first and the foremost, we have to protect them. We have to protect what is really necessary to build a supporting system for us. So this coming to Montreal by Global Biodiversity Framework actually give us that target. So for you to help to read the framework, the target one talk about all areas and the participatory integrated biodiversity inclusive spatial planning. Basically, we plan our land, where conserve, where to sensibly manage. So that's really the whole area in that. So in the spatial planning, and their target 2. So in a way, conserve species and spaces, right? Target 2 talk about we restore, as Marco mentioned, 30% of the degraded terrestrial inland water and coastal marine ecosystems. That's in the target 2. Then in target 3, that's another 30% of land, inland water, and also 30% of ocean will be protected. That's in target 3. Then in target 4, we saw a significant improvement from, after the negotiation, we see the halting the human-induced extinction of species by 2030 has been brought in. That is the ambition we need to go. Without halting the extinction of species, we cannot really build back or restore our nature. So those are the effort we could collectively agree to go to. We also do see there are still some gaps during our implementation, need to really to fill in that gap. For example, in target 1, the spatial planning to talk about, but trying to bring the loss of ecosystem and high ecological integrity close to 0 by 2030. That is only that will not bring us restore nature, because you only bring close to 0, you're hardly halting that. So that's really need to work on that. And then on the target 2, on the restoration 30%, as Marco mentioned, baseline has to be there. So then we will know actually what percentage, what really restoration has been achieved with this baseline. I think that those are really to put great effort collectively agreed by the world to protect species and spaces that are fundamental for our for restore halting the reverse loss to reverse the loss of nature. That alone does not do the trick. So my next colleague will talk about what more we need to do to be able to halt and reverse loss of nature by 2030.
Exactly. Thanks so much, Lynn. So lots of ambition on species and habitat targets. How does it look on drivers?
Thank you. Yes, I think we've seen significant progress in a number of areas where drivers need to be addressed. Just to reiterate a few points already made, the overall ambition on pollution, in particularly halving the risk of pesticides, is important. pollution is one of the 5 direct drivers of biodiversity loss. Also, the action on productive sectors, and particularly the mention of agroecology, is really significant. I cannot emphasize that enough. Agroecology is really about a transition and transformation towards agricultural production that will work with nature and not against it. And it will deliver long-term benefits for people, food security, and biodiversity. Also in terms of action with regards to the finance behind those productive sectors, we've seen significant progress, alignment of financial flows with the goals and targets, so fairly specific language is included in the framework, and also there's ambition in repurposing or eliminating harmful incentives. And really the emphasis and focus there is and should rightfully be on eliminating the harmful aspects of the incentives, the elements that are harmful to nature. So we think that there's no excuse for parties to urgently implement actions at scale to address these drivers, even though we would have liked to see stronger language in a number of areas. It's unfortunate that the reference to planetary boundaries was removed at the last minute from the text. And although we don't have specific numerical targets in the text, the targets do commit governments to act on reducing negative and increasing positive impacts of businesses, and also to reduce overconsumption. Also in that respect, it is relevant that the cover decision, which sits on top of the actual global biodiversity framework, refers to the Sustainable Development Goals, and it invites the General Assembly of the United Nations to recognize the plan and to take progress in the implementation of this new plan into account when assessing progress of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that is a really important recognition of the parties of the importance of this plan as a contribution to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Then I finally would like to talk about one other aspect, and that's the rights-based approach. We believe that there's a significant recognition in the text of the relevance of implementing the framework through a rights-based approach. It's recognized in the preambular sections, but also in relevant goals and targets. We're glad to see that proposals put forward by indigenous peoples and local communities have been incorporated in the text, and also that gender and intergenerational equity have been recognized, and that they're inserted in such a way that progress can be measured. So really, these are all very fundamental transformations that now need to be put in place and acted on by governments. The first step really is that they need to incorporate and translate these global goals and targets into their national biodiversity action plans and into their national finance biodiversity plans, and then start implementing actions on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Guido. Right. So when the gavel fell last night, and I think it was actually 3 o'clock and 33 minutes, we had the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. But these goals and targets will only remain words on paper unless they're urgently and fully implemented by countries and all stakeholders. We need to see action, and like we heard, there is no excuse not to start implementing. There is also an implementation mechanism included in the package, in the deal, and the good news is it is definitely stronger than it was for its predecessor, the IG targets. So we really welcome the improved reporting and monitoring, as well as the newly introduced global review of progress. I think those are important steps to improve implementation and a good part of the implementation mechanism. It's also great to see that some type of ratcheting step was included that allows countries to improve actions and effort in certain intervals over time after the review step. But tragically, that ratcheting type step is only voluntary. And we as WWF will certainly make sure that countries are held accountable for their actions and make sure that they do take that ratcheting step, even if it's only voluntary. And we will hold their feet to the fire to make sure that implementation is happen at its fullest. Right. So we do have a little bit of time for a few questions. Can journalists please step forward and say your name? As always, you know the drill. Say your name, say your outlet, keep it short. And let's start here, please.
Thanks very much, everyone. Daisy Dunn from Carbon Brief. I wanted to ask about Goal A, because I know there were quite a few concerns about numerical targets and dates being taken out of Goal A. Are those concerns kind of lessened a bit now that we've seen some new language around halting species extinctions by 2030 in the targets? Thank you.
Thanks. Let's maybe take the question from this gentleman as well, please.
Good morning, Emilio Godoy, Interpress Service and the Earth Journalist Network. I would like to ask you if voluntary is a recipe for disaster, as we've seen in the climate field. And in this sense, do you foresee biodiversity lawsuits because of not progress being made, as it has happened in the climate field? Thank you.
I think I also saw a question on this side. That lady, please.
Thank you, Natasha Gilbert from Nature. I was just wondering if there is a danger that with China's sort of strong arming of the framework past the post and not fully recognizing the DRC's objections, will that in some way stall proper implementation of the framework? Is there a danger there?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take these questions in the order as they were asked. Lynn, are you okay to answer on Goal A?
Sure. So Goal A is by 2050, and we see the human-induced extinction of known threatened species halted by 2050. That is not really given us very much of progressing on what we have agreed on Aichi. But Aichi is already under the water. What we need to do is we have to increase our conservation effort to make sure that we actually do reduce as target 4 mentioned, do reduce halt human-induced extinction by 2030. I also mentioned that in Goal A, the abundance of native wild species increased. I think that's a good sign. So we also need to think about a way using the right indicator to indicate the abundance of species that we can actually see them, growth. Reverse the downward trend and growing. Living Planet Index is actually one of that. It's become the component indicator. So we wished it could be a headline indicator for Goal A. So that's the situation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Let me respond on the question about voluntary ratchet and if this is a recipe for disaster. So it is good that we have this ratchet step, even if it's just voluntary. And also the rest of the implementation mechanism is much better than it was for its predecessor. I really would like to emphasize that. We have seen in other UN processes that voluntary reporting or voluntary action can often lead to success. Firstly, there is the technique of name and shame that civil society sometimes deploys, which really encourages countries to do better and to do well. And we can also often see a kind of friendly competition, especially within regions, developing, even if it's voluntary, that all countries will want to do really well and better maybe than other countries in their region. So there is reasons to assume or to hope that there will be implementation of this ratchet step as well. And it will be at the end of the day also our job as civil society to make sure, hold governments accountable, make sure that they will do it and that they up the ante each time when there's a review. I will pass on to Marco for the last question about China?
Thank you, Benedetto. Just to maybe to build on what you just said, we agree with you. We are not happy about voluntary, as Benedetto explained. I think it's key as we move forward that we establish somehow an independent and solid mechanism to track progress against the commitments and in a transparent way. To your question, excuse me, it's not for us to comment on the procedures. We heard yesterday the Secretariat that they concluded that there was not a breach of procedures and that DRC raised a concern, a strong concern. But as I said in my opening, we shouldn't ignore that concern. In fact, that concern is very widespread. It's widespread within the developing countries because, as we have supported from the very beginning, a clear target that now we have and a set of instruments that will reach that target of resource mobilization from various sources is absolutely critical. And now is key that we hold the whole world, and particularly the richer countries, accountable for delivering the target and for creating mechanisms that will be able to channel the resources in a way that is far more accessible than it's been until now.
Thanks so much. Time is really flying, and unfortunately, we have run out of it once again. The next press conference is going to start on time, so therefore we need to wrap up here. Thanks to all of you for coming along on this roller coaster ride. And as promised, we will be available outside the green room for more questions and any diving deeper into any of the topics. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you.